Hello there, and welcome. Welcome to this quiet corner of the night where curiosity is allowed to wander without hurry, where the pace of the world slows just enough for us to notice the questions that have been waiting patiently tucked beneath the surface of our thoughts. Tonight, we're not talking about tomorrow, or even the next century. We're stepping back, far back, beyond the limits of history as we know it, beyond the rise and fall of empires, beyond the reach of kings and conquerors. Tonight, we're asking something at once simple and impossibly vast. What if humanity isn't the first civilization on Earth? Before we begin, if you're new here, leave a like. It helps this story find its way to other curious minds, the kind who might be awake right now, wandering through the same questions as you. Leave us a comment too. Tell us where you are in the world and what time it is for you. There's something quietly beautiful about knowing people in every time zone share this moment together. And if this way of exploring speaks to you, consider subscribing, so you'll always have a place to return to. Thank you. Now, let's sink into it. The story of Earth is older, stranger, and far more patient than anything we can fully imagine. Our own species, Homo sapiens, has walked this planet for about 300,000 years, a blink in geological time. Civilizations, the kind we think of when we picture cities, writing, agriculture, and art, barely stretch back 6,000 or 7,000 years. To us, that span feels enormous. To the Earth, it is the briefest flicker. In those countless millions of years before us, continents drifted like slow rafts across oceans, mountains rose and eroded to nothing, seas appeared and vanished. Climate shifted from frozen deserts to humid jungles, and life itself experimented again and again with new forms. Each of these shifts wiped away what came before, leaving only faint traces in stone, fossil, and memory. And so the question lingers: if another civilization, not quite human, but intelligent in its own way, once flourished here, would we even know? The Earth is an eraser as much as it is a storyteller. It writes in mountains, then scrapes them away with glaciers. It carves its poems into stone, then folds that stone into the crust, burying its words beneath new chapters. Even our own cities, our shining glass towers and highways, if left alone for a few million years, would collapse into rubble. Rubble would dissolve into soil. Soil would harden into rock. And eventually, even that rock would vanish into the churning mantle beneath. So what would remain? What could survive the patient hand of time? Every now and then, something small washes up. Not literally from the sea, but from the deep strata of the earth. A fragment, unremarkable at first glance. A stone that seems ordinary, until someone notices a mark across its surface that doesn't quite fit the patterns of weathering. A shape half buried in fossil beds that resembles something crafted, not grown. A mineral seam where the alignment looks too deliberate, too regular, as though someone, long before us, pressed their own design into it. Most of these finds are dismissed, catalogued as natural quirks, shelved in the back rooms of museums or quietly returned to the ground. But occasionally, they spark imagination, like a single bone unearthed in the desert, hinting at the skeleton of some animal we've never known. From the smallest fragment, whole possibilities unfold. It isn't proof. Proof is not what we have. What we have is suggestion, the faintest whisper, carried across eras, so long that even continents have shifted in the time between. But that whisper is enough to stir the thought. Maybe we are not the first. And if not the first, then who were they? Imagine, if you will, a world long before us. A world with rivers flowing across lands, where our deserts now lie. A world of humid forests sprawling across what we call Antarctica. A world where the creatures walking alongside those forests were not quite like us, but not without their own spark of intelligence. They would not have looked human. Perhaps they were shaped by an environment we would find unrecognizable, taller, smaller, furred, scaled, or something in between. Their senses might have reached where ours cannot, perceiving colors invisible to our eyes, or hearing vibrations too subtle for us to detect. Their cultures, if they had them, would not resemble ours. Their homes might have been built from materials that leave no trace, woven into the living environment rather than carved out of it. Their languages, if they spoke, could have been songs carried on the air or patterns written in water. And yet, in their own way, they may have been bound by the same things we are: the need to eat, to protect, to wonder, and to belong. We can imagine them standing at the edge of a river we now call by another name, watching the reflection of stars that were already old, already burning their way towards silence. Perhaps they too felt the strangeness of existence. Perhaps they too wondered if they were alone. What we know for certain is that civilizations, however they arise, are fragile against the sweep of time. Even our own. Think of the ruins scattered across Earth from cultures only thousands of years gone. The eroded step pyramids, swallowed by jungles, the stone circles weathered by storms, the forgotten cities that once rang with laughter and market calls, now nothing more than empty foundations in the sand. If so much can vanish in so little time, what might millions of years erase? Take, for example, the petrified forests found across continents: Arizona, Argentina, Egypt, and beyond. Once living trees turned to stone, locked in mineral embrace for over 200 million years. They tell us forests once flourished where now deserts reign. They remind us how completely landscapes can change. Now imagine, among those forests, the faint imprint of something crafted. A shape so eroded it might be dismissed as nothing, and yet, what if it wasn't? Or consider the fossils of creatures discovered in places that seem impossible. Seashells atop mountains, whale bones in deserts, traces of life preserved where life no longer belongs. Each one a reminder that the earth has worn many faces, and that the world we know today is only one of its many masks. So too might there be remnants of something else, something that lived and died and left behind only the faintest echo. Of course, there is another layer here, a kind of duality. It is easy to look back at these imagined civilizations and feel jealousy, to picture a life tied so closely to the rhythms of a younger, wild earth, to wonder what it might have been like to walk in harmony with landscapes that to us feel harsh, but to them might have been home. But there is gratitude, too. Gratitude for the paths we do have, for the comforts our ancestors carved out of struggle. Gratitude for fire and language and shelter, for the chance to even ask these questions under the soft glow of modern light. The civilizations before, if they were real, may have lived lives both harsher and more beautiful than ours. They may have known abundance in ways we do not, but suffered struggles we cannot imagine. And in that balance, jealousy and gratitude, loss and wonder, there is something quietly grounding. And so we return to the question: if humanity isn't the first civilization on Earth, then what are we? Are we simply the latest chapter in a story the planet has been telling for eons? Are we the inheritors of a stage where others have already played and exited, leaving behind only fragments that time has half erased? Or are we the first to leave a mark strong enough to last? Will our traces, our satellites, our plastics, our altered landscapes persist for millions of years where theirs did not. It is not a question with a final answer. It may never be one we can prove. But perhaps proof isn't the point. Perhaps the value lies in the asking, in allowing ourselves to imagine the Earth not just as our home, but as a place that has held countless mysteries before us and will continue long after. The quiet truth is this: we do not stand at the beginning of history. We stand in the middle of a story far larger than ourselves. A story whose earlier pages are worn, smudged, and torn away. And yet, if you lean close enough, you can still hear their echoes in the wind, in the stone, and in the shifting ground beneath your feet. This is where our journey begins. In the next part, we'll walk further into the deep history of the Earth, exploring how landscapes themselves erase and preserve traces of what came before. We'll look at the geological forces that make Earth both a cradle and a destroyer of civilizations, and consider what whispers of the past still linger beneath our feet. For now, rest in the thought that you are part of something vast, something layered, something mysterious, and perhaps, just perhaps, not the first to stand here and wonder. As the Earth turns quietly beneath the stars, the layers of time continue their slow, patient work. Imagine standing on a plane that has shifted countless times over millennia. Beneath your feet lie sediments laid down by rivers long vanished, soils formed under climates now impossible to recreate. Every step you take presses against memory, a record written not in ink or story, but in stone, in dust, in the shape of the land itself. Time is patient, but it is relentless. It wears down the sharp edges of mountains, smooths the jagged cliffs, and slowly folds entire continents into themselves. A forest that once stretched for hundreds of kilometers can vanish almost without a trace, leaving only hints in fossilized trunks or pollen grains trapped in amber. And if civilizations arose amidst this ever-shifting world, they too would have felt the hand of time, not as something abstract, but as a daily, living presence. Occasionally, the Earth offers us fragments, not monuments, not skyscrapers, not shining temples, but small, mysterious remnants. A stone, strangely shaped, a piece of metal, corroded beyond recognition, a fossil that seems misplaced in its layer, as though pulled from a story it doesn't belong to. At first glance, these fragments are unremarkable, ignored by passers-by and catalogued by scientists as curiosities or anomalies, but in them lies possibility. Much like a paleontologist discovering a single tooth, only to reconstruct an entire creature, a fragment may hint at a story far larger than itself, a world long vanished yet somehow echoing into ours. Picture a smooth stone washed up from a riverbank, worn by centuries of water. Nothing about it screams importance, but glance closer and subtle marks trace across its surface, delicate lines too organized to be purely natural, patterns faint enough that they might easily be dismissed. Perhaps this is all that remains of a structure, a tool, or an object from a civilization that moved across the land before us. Perhaps it is nothing. And yet, for a brief, fleeting moment, your mind can see what time has almost erased, imagining an entire world from a single fragment. And in that imagining, the Earth stretches backward. You can see rivers flowing through landscapes that today are deserts, oceans that now retreat into silence, and forests that vanish into stone. You can see creatures, strange and unfamiliar, moving through these lands, not entirely human, not alien, but living, breathing forms with intelligence tuned to a world unlike our own. Perhaps they moved in harmony with the tides of wind and water, with the cycles of fire and flood. Perhaps they built communities that were not easily visible to the casual eye, structures integrated into the landscape, homes that grew as organically as the trees and ferns that surrounded them. The faintest traces of these lives might exist in subtle contrasts between now and then. Consider a modern river, carefully channeled, flowing past cities and farmlands. Long ago, it may have been wider, wilder, carving its path through a valley where another kind of life thrived. Creatures walked its banks that no longer exist, and beings, not human, might have built along it in ways that left only whispers. Look at a mountain range today, jagged and imposing, and imagine it millions of years ago, softer from erosion, dotted with forests where another civilization watched the seasons shift, not counting years, but patterns, cycles, and the rhythms of the land itself. These are not fantastical notions, but grounded in the evidence of Earth's deep history. Petrified forests, fossilized coral reefs atop deserts, whale bones high in mountain ranges. Each discovery reminds us that the planet we inhabit today is only one version of itself. It is both temporary and fragile, a brief chapter in a narrative that has unfolded for eons. And within that narrative, there is room for intelligence to have flourished, even if only faintly recorded. The duality is striking. On one hand, we feel gratitude for the world we inherit, its measured seasons, its predictable cycles, its steady resources. On the other hand, a subtle envy emerges for what once was, for the wild expanses of unbroken forest, for creatures and beings whose lives and designs we cannot fully know, for freedom that came without fences, without borders, without the constraints we have layered over the land. These feelings coexist, quietly, a yin and yang of perspective that deepens our sense of connection to the earth. Even the smallest fragment of a past civilization carries this tension, a shard of metal in a coal seam, a faint carving in stone, or a fossilized object that doesn't match known life, all suggest a presence once lived, now nearly erased. You can almost sense the hands that shaped it, the awareness that hovered over it, the purpose that once gave it meaning. And yet, the fragment is indistinct, subtle, leaving the mind to fill in the gaps. In that act of imagining, we are connected across millions of years, touching a consciousness that was not ours, yet undeniably part of the same world. The landscapes themselves tell a similar story. Picture a desert today, flat and dry, windswept and barren. Millions of years ago, the same ground may have been lush, fed by rivers that no longer run, watered by rainfall patterns that have vanished. Creatures that roamed the land, some small, some enormous, would have shaped it in ways we can barely perceive. Perhaps beings walked among them, observing, shaping, learning, creating patterns that the wind has long since erased. And yet, subtle hints remain. Fossilized footprints, traces of sediment disturbed in unusual ways, alignments in the rocks that feel deliberate, though the centuries have softened them. Even as time erodes, some memories remain. A petrified forest in Arizona tells us that once, green giants shaded creatures now lost. A limestone cliff along a coast hints that it was once submerged, home to forms of life no longer here. And scattered among these layers, tiny fragments of unknown origin, sometimes brushed aside, sometimes preserved in archives, invite speculation. What stories could they tell if we had the eyes to see? What lives did they touch? What knowledge might they carry, silently waiting beneath the soil? The past is not always benevolent, however. Life and environment have long been in tension. In eras before us, survival demanded adaptation to extremes, searing heat, sudden floods, harsh winters. And yet, within these struggles, there was beauty. Rivers teeming with life, forests dense with unseen wonders, skies alive with birds and insects larger and stranger than any we know today. Life and intelligence alike found ways to exist, to thrive, to leave impressions on the world. And in that, there is an echo for us, a reminder that the world we inherit is not simply a stage for comfort, but a living, breathing entity that has tested all who came before us. In imagining these lives, we must resist the urge to anthropomorphize too much. They were not humans in our image. Their senses, their bodies, their cultures would have been alien to us, and yet utterly natural to them. They may have moved in patterns aligned with lunar cycles, or the migration of enormous creatures, or subtle shifts in wind and water. Their understanding of survival and community may have been intertwined with the environment in ways that today feel impossible, yet entirely logical in context. And perhaps the most fascinating aspect of all is how little it takes to hint at their existence. A small object, a fragment of a structure, a subtle pattern in fossilized soil. These tiny remnants can spark the imagination to reconstruct entire worlds. They invite us to consider that intelligence can leave traces that endure in unexpected ways, scattered through the planet like seeds in the wind. We begin to see a rhythm the earth creates, preserves, erases, and conceals. Within that rhythm, life appears and disappears. And somewhere in the folds of that process, the possibility of civilizations other than our own emerges, not as fantasy, but as a quiet, plausible truth. It is in the interplay of time and memory, creation and erosion, that the story truly unfolds. The fragments whisper possibilities, the fossils hint at the impossible, and the landscapes themselves preserve echoes of lives that may have touched the world in ways now mostly invisible. And yet, for those who choose to imagine, the earth becomes alive with stories just beyond our reach, narratives that stretch beyond human memory, and questions that refuse easy answers. In this way, the past speaks to us, even faintly. It asks us to consider the long view, to appreciate what survives, and to wonder what might have been lost. It reminds us that our own presence is fleeting, that the world is both generous and relentless, and that curiosity is perhaps the only way to touch what has otherwise vanished. And as we walk through these ideas, the subtle contrasts of today and then emerge. The rivers we know, the mountains we climb, the forests we wander, all are touched by millions of years of change, and all carry hints of what has passed. Even in the cities we inhabit, the streets and buildings lie atop layers of memory, layers that may include remnants of lives and intelligence that preceded our own. This juxtaposition of now and then creates a quiet tension, gratitude for what is, wonder for what was, and curiosity for what may yet be discovered. And so the journey continues, not as a question to be answered, but as a story to experience, a meditation on time, life, and the possibility that humanity, for all its achievements, is only a part of a vast ongoing narrative that stretches across eons. If you pause for a moment and really listen to the ground beneath your feet, it almost feels alive with memory. Every grain of sand, every pebble, every ridge of stone is part of a record, written long before we appeared. The earth, in its silence, is the most patient archivist. It keeps fragments of every story, though not in neat chapters or clear narratives, but in scattered pieces, hidden within the folds of rock and soil. Imagine a mountain. To most eyes, it is simply a massive form of stone, immovable and timeless. But to geologists, It is a book. Each layer pressed into the cliffs reveals a different era, a different climate, a different arrangement of life. And scattered across those layers, every so often, are hints of something else, unusual alignments of rock, strange patterns that look deliberate, or even objects that do not quite belong. For those willing to look closely, the mountain speaks in fragments. It tells of seas that once covered its surface, of forests that grew and turned to stone, and perhaps of hands, not human hands, but intelligent hands, that once left faint impressions before vanishing into the long tide of time. The earth is careful with its secrets. It reveals only what erosion or chance allows. A landslide may suddenly uncover fossilized remains that sat untouched for millions of years. A shifting river might carry forward a stone unlike any other in the region. A hiker may stumble upon a carving weathered beyond recognition, so faint that it looks like nothing more than scratches, unless the imagination leans into it. These revelations are never direct, never obvious, and often cloaked in enough ambiguity that they can be dismissed. But for the curious, they serve as invitations, subtle openings into possibilities hidden in plain sight. There are stories of explorers finding strange formations deep in caves, long covered in calcite, so eroded that no one can tell as they were natural or the remnants of some design. There are accounts of artifacts found in layers of rock that seem impossibly old, well beyond the accepted timeline of human history. Most are brushed aside as mistakes, misplacements, or curiosities, but the sheer persistence of these anomalies creates a quiet murmur, a suggestion that perhaps the Earth holds more stories than we have been able or willing to hear. Think about how memory works in families. A story is told by a grandparent, then repeated by a parent, and finally shared with a child. Over time, details shift, words change, but the essence of the story remains. The Earth's memory functions in a similar way, except it has no words. It has stone, fossils, and erosion. Its stories are told through cliffs and valleys, through the placement of shells in the highest mountains, through the scattering of objects in unexpected places. The details are fragmented, but the essence remains. Something was here, and it left an impression. One might compare these impressions to footprints left in mud. At first, they are sharp, clear, and easily recognizable. But as time passes, rain falls, wind blows, the edges blur. Eventually, the footprint becomes little more than a shallow depression. Yet even then, it still whispers of the one who passed. In much the same way, the civilizations or beings who may have lived before us leave only faint traces, not cities rising into the air, but soft depressions in the timeline of the Earth, just enough for us to wonder. This wondering carries us into contrasts. Today, we walk through cities of glass and steel, illuminated by lights that pierce the night sky, but all of it rests upon a thin surface of soil, beneath which lie countless forgotten layers. The ground beneath a modern street may conceal the remnants of an ancient settlement, and beneath that, the fossils of creatures long extinct, and beneath that, perhaps even older stories. The Earth is not static, it is layered, like a palimpsest, a manuscript written over and over again, with faint echoes of previous texts bleeding through. Consider also how little we truly know of the deep oceans. Vast areas of the seafloor remain unmapped, their mysteries untouched. Occasionally, storms wash ashore objects that make no sense, shaped forms of stone, coral, that seem altered by more than waves. Sailors throughout history told stories of strange structures glimpsed beneath the waters, walls and pillars hidden in the silence of the deep. Most of these tales are now dismissed as folklore, yet the ocean continues to surprise us, yielding ruins, shipwrecks, and formations that defy easy explanation. Could the seas, too, be archivists, holding stories erased from the land? The beauty of these possibilities lies not in certainty, but in imagination. A shard of pottery found in a desert might belong to a culture we recognize, or it might be a misinterpreted fragment of something far older linked to beings who lived in harmony with a landscape we no longer see. A fossilized structure in stone should be dismissed as natural, yet the lines and curves suggest purpose. These fragments never reveal the full story, but they invite us to step into it, to consider what life may have looked like in times so distant that they bend our sense of history. And just as Earth preserves, it also erases. Wind, rain, ice, and fire all act as editors, cutting down the details until only the vaguest outlines remain. Imagine a civilization that built with wood, with plants, with Earth itself. After thousands of years, almost nothing would remain. No towering ruins, no shining statues, only subtle marks in soil layers, hints of settlement patterns invisible without deep study. To us, their world would appear to have vanished. To the Earth, it was simply absorbed into its ongoing story, layered over by new forests, new rivers, new landscapes. There is humility in recognizing this, our own world, our own creations, no matter how immense they seem, are subject to the same slow erasure. Skyscrapers will crumble, metal will rust, glass will break down. Someday, long after us, the memory of our time will be pressed into layers, reduced to fragments, and perhaps misinterpreted by those who come after. In imagining civilizations before us, we are also imagining ourselves, reflected in the mirror of time, subject to the same forces, the same forgetting. Yet, this reflection also brings gratitude. To live now, with the fragments of so many worlds beneath us, is to be part of something vast. We inherit not only the land and seas, but the echoes of lives and intelligences that came before, woven into the earth itself. Every stone, every fossil, every odd fragment is a quiet reminder that we are not alone in this story. We never have been. We are simply one verse in a poem still being written. And so when we walk through a forest today, hearing the rustle of leaves and the call of birds, it is worth remembering that others once walked through forests of their own forests, now long fossilized, their songs and voices erased. When we look out over the ocean, stretching endlessly toward the horizon, it is worth imagining what might lie below, not just creatures of scale and fin, but the quiet ruins of lives we may never fully understand. The earth whispers, always. It whispers through cliffs and caves, through washed-up stones and misplaced fragments, through fossils and formations that resist explanation. It whispers through absence, too, reminding us that what we see today is only a fraction of what has been. And in those whispers lies both comfort and mystery. Comfort, because we are part of a greater story, and mystery, because we will never fully know the depths of it. To live with that mystery is to live with humility. It is to recognize that our time is precious, fleeting, and that the world around us is not just ours, but an inheritance from countless eras, countless lives. It is to see gratitude and wonder, envy and awe, all woven together in the quiet rhythm of Earth's memory. If you observe the Earth carefully, a pattern begins to emerge. Nothing on this planet remains unchanged. Forests grow, flourish, and are replaced by grasslands. Seas rise and fall, swallowing coastlines and revealing new lands. Even mountains, which appear eternal, are slowly ground down by wind and rain, while elsewhere, new peaks push upward through the crust. The Earth is not static. It is a cycle of building, eroding, and renewing. This rhythm extends to life itself. Species rise to dominance, thrive for a time, and then fade, replaced by others better suited to the ever-shifting climate. The great reptiles that once ruled the land gave way to mammals. Mighty forests of towering ferns yielded to new ecosystems, shaped by new plants and new conditions. In every case, what once seemed permanent eventually passed into memory. It is not difficult, then, to imagine that civilizations follow the same rhythm. They too rise, flourish, and collapse, leaving only traces behind. We have seen this in our own human history. Great cities once thrived in the jungles of Central America, their temples and pyramids rising above the canopy. But centuries of neglect and overgrowth concealed them so completely that their very existence was forgotten, until explorers stumbled upon their remnants. Once, these cities were centers of life, trade, and belief. For generations, people lived and died within them, confident in their permanence. And yet, to later generations, they were simply shadows hidden beneath trees. If entire civilizations we know of could vanish into obscurity within the span of a few centuries, how much more could be erased over thousands or even millions of years? This question carries us deeper into the rhythm of time, into the possibility that civilizations unlike our own, perhaps not even human, might have flourished and fallen long before us, their traces hidden beneath the shifting surface of the Earth. What would such a civilization look like? We cannot say for certain, but if they shared the same patterns of rise and collapse that we see in nature, then they too might have built, created, and sought permanence, only to be humbled by the slow power of erosion, climate, and catastrophe. Their monuments may not have been built from stone, their homes may not have resembled ours. They may have chosen materials that left little trace, or lived in harmony with landscapes that have long since transformed. Think about our own world. Even now, entire cities stand vulnerable to the forces of nature. Rising seas threaten coastal towns, expanding deserts consume farmland. Earthquakes topple buildings in moments. Fire, flood, and storm reveal how fragile our sense of permanence truly is. If not for our relentless rebuilding, entire regions could be abandoned to the wilderness, reclaimed and forgotten within a generation or two. The jungles of Cambodia swallowed anchor. The deserts of Mesopotamia buried cities in sand. If such erasure is possible in mere centuries, what does time measured in millennia erase? Some researchers suggest that the Earth has gone through cycles of flourishing and collapse, not only in ecosystems, but in the very climate itself. Ice ages have advanced and retreated, reshaping entire continents. Massive volcanic eruptions have darkened the skies for years at a time, altering temperatures and extinguishing species. Even asteroids have struck, reshuffling the conditions of life. Each of these events created endings, but also beginnings. In their wake, new opportunities arose, new forms of life flourished, and so, if civilizations once existed before us, it is not difficult to imagine that they, too, were swept away by such rhythms, erased in the same way forests and seas are erased, folded back into the Earth's memory. There is a certain humility in acknowledging that we are not immune to these cycles. Our cities, our technologies, our monuments, all are bound to the same laws. Over time, they too will be worn down, buried, or broken apart. Someday, perhaps far in the future, fragments of us may be discovered in strange places, puzzling those who come after. a shard of plastic lodged in rock, a rusted beam pressed into the soil, a faint trace of radiation or chemical change in the layers of sediment. To those who uncover them, we may appear mysterious, incomplete, difficult to classify. Our existence will be reduced to fragments, just as those who came before were reduced for us. But there is also a beauty here. The cycles of rise and fall are not only about loss, but about continuity. Just as forests regrow after fire, or rivers carve new valleys after floods, civilizations, if they exist, may emerge again and again, each unique, each shaped by the conditions of its time. Perhaps the beings who came before us lived through struggles and triumphs much like our own, wrestling with their environments, crafting cultures, and finding meaning in their existence. Perhaps their collapse was not failure, but simply part of the greater rhythm, clearing the way for something new. When we look around our world today, we often see progress as a straight line, from past to present, always advancing forward. But the Earth does not move in straight lines. It moves in circles, in spirals, in repetitions. What has been before may come again, though never in the same way. If humanity is not the first civilization, then perhaps we are not the last either. Perhaps we are simply one note in an ongoing melody, part of a cycle that has been playing for eons. Consider how this thought reshapes our perspective. The skyscrapers and highways of today feel immense, yet in the scope of Earth's time, they are fleeting. The beings who may have come before us, walking their own landscapes, may have felt the same way about their own creations. Their homes, their symbols, their ways of life, all must have felt central, irreplaceable. Yet time folded them away, leaving only whispers. When we realize this, our own sense of permanence softens. What we have is precious, but also temporary, a gift of the moment, and so, gratitude arises. To live now, aware of the fragility of civilizations, is to live with a deeper appreciation for what we have. The warmth of shelter, the sound of voices, the beauty of light in the night, all of it exists within a cycle larger than us, a cycle that has been spinning for untold ages. To know this is not to despair, but to feel a quiet connection to the past we cannot fully see, and to the future we cannot fully imagine. The earth continues to whisper, in the steady rhythm of tides, in the growth and decay of forests, in the layering of stone. Its voice is patient, reminding us that rise and fall are not endings, but parts of a greater whole. If others lived before us, if they rose and faded in cycles beyond our memory, then perhaps their essence is still with us, not in ruins or monuments, but in the very rhythm of the earth itself, carrying forward into every new beginning. If civilizations rose and fell long before us, then what traces could possibly remain? Time is a patient eraser. Winds grind mountains down to dust. Rivers carve through stone until even the hardest rock yields. Seas shift their boundaries, swallowing coasts, erasing shorelines, and burying them beneath silt. Over millions of years, entire continents drift, tilt, and reshape themselves. To expect a complete city to survive all this is unrealistic, yet, sometimes, small things endure. Think of an archaeologist kneeling in the dirt, brushing soil away from a fragment of pottery. To most eyes, it is a simple shard, unremarkable, broken, meaningless. But to those trained to read the past, it is a window into another life. From that one shard, they may imagine an entire bowl, an entire workshop, an entire culture. They can picture the hands that made it, the fire that hardened it, the meal that it once held. From so little, the mind builds so much. Now, Imagine if the Earth itself held fragments from civilizations older than any we've ever known. Not bowls or stone tools, but something stranger, something unclassifiable. A chunk of mineral fused in a way that doesn't quite make sense. A layer of soil discolored by chemicals that shouldn't be there. An odd structure in a rock formation, as if once shaped by intention, now blurred by eons of pressure. Individually, such anomalies are easy to dismiss, but collectively, they whisper of possibilities. There are, scattered throughout history, reports of discoveries that spark questions. A finely shaped object lodged deep in a coal seam, far older than any human tool should be. Geometrically patterned stones unearthed where only natural randomness was expected. Strange metallic spheres found in mines, smooth and precise, though surrounded by rock said to be millions of years old. Most of these reports are met with skepticism, and rightly so. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. Yet even skepticism cannot completely erase the quiet curiosity they inspire. We do not need to claim proof to feel the pull of these mysteries. Rather, we can let them remind us of how much the Earth still hides, and how much we still do not know. For every artifact catalogued in a museum, countless others remain buried, lost, or worn into unrecognizability. What has already been erased, we cannot measure. What survives may only be the faintest echo of something greater. Consider also the remnants of life itself. Fossils are rare gifts, preserved only under exceptional conditions. The vast majority of living beings leave no trace at all. Their bones dissolve, their shells crumble, their bodies return to soil and sea. For every fossil we discover, there may have been millions of creatures that vanished without record. So too, perhaps, with civilizations, if most of their traces vanished, then what we are left with may be so subtle, so incomplete, that we struggle to recognize it for what it is. It is here that imagination and science meet. The geologist sees a peculiar layer in the stone, unusual in its chemistry. The archaeologist wonders if it hints at a presence older than any we've named. The philosopher considers what it means for our place in time. None of them can say with certainty, but together, their questions form a chorus of possibility. And here lies the delicate balance: to dwell in these possibilities without rushing to answers, to allow the mind to hold uncertainty, to live in the space between known and unknown. This, too, is part of the rhythm of life. For just as rivers carve valleys slowly, so too does understanding emerge slowly, worn from fragments, whispers, and anomalies that resist easy explanation. At the same time, the contrast with our present day cannot be ignored. We live in an age of satellites, microscopes, and vast archives of knowledge. We measure the movement of galaxies, we split atoms, we map genomes. Yet, for all our tools, the Earth remains full of questions we cannot yet answer. How humbling to imagine that if civilizations existed before us, they too may have felt the same, surrounded by mysteries they could not fully explain, building their lives against a backdrop of uncertainty. Perhaps their fragments are beneath our very feet now, locked away in stone, disguised as natural oddities. Perhaps their traces rest at the bottom of oceans, buried beneath sediments and pressures we cannot yet explore. Or perhaps their remnants linger in the air and soil, diffused so widely that we mistake them for part of nature itself. Like the faint scent of smoke long after a fire, the signs may be there, subtle, elusive, but real. It is tempting to want certainty, to demand clear evidence, undeniable proof. But sometimes, the greater gift lies in the uncertainty itself. It opens the mind. It invites us to wonder. It softens our sense of permanence, reminding us that what we see is never the whole story. This is not a story of loss alone, but of connection to mysteries larger than us, to histories deeper than our own. And perhaps this is where gratitude enters once more. For even in the absence of answers, there is beauty in the not knowing. The fragment in the soil, the anomaly in the stone, the odd object in the seam of coal. Each of these is a reminder that the earth is vast, layered, and full of secrets. We are not at the end of its story, nor even at the center. We are participants, explorers, dreamers, adding our own layer to a planet that has seen many before us and will see many after. The whispers of possible civilizations long past may never grow into full voices. They may remain suggestions, hints, shadows, but they enrich our experience nonetheless. They remind us to look with softer eyes, to hold both wonder and humility, to know that even the most fleeting trace can change the way we see the world. As the earth turns quietly beneath the stars, the layers of time continue their slow, patient work. Imagine standing on a plane that has shifted countless times over millennia. Beneath your feet lie sediments laid down by rivers long vanished, soils formed under climates now impossible to recreate. Every step you take presses against memory, a record written not in ink or story, but in stone, in dust, in the shape of the land itself. Time is patient, but it is relentless. It wears down the sharp edges of mountains, smooths the jagged cliffs, and slowly folds entire continents into themselves. A forest that once stretched for hundreds of kilometers can vanish almost without a trace, leaving only hints in fossilized trunks or pollen grains trapped in amber. And if civilizations arose amidst this ever-shifting world, they too would have felt the hand of time, not as something abstract, but as a daily, living presence. Occasionally, the earth offers us fragments, not monuments, not skyscrapers, not shining temples, but small, mysterious remnants. A stone, strangely shaped, a piece of metal, corroded beyond recognition, a fossil that seems misplaced in its layer, as though pulled from a story it doesn't belong to. At first glance, these fragments are unremarkable, ignored by passers-by and catalogued by scientists as curiosities or anomalies, but in them lies possibility. Much like a paleontologist discovering a single tooth, only to reconstruct an entire creature, a fragment may hint at a story far larger than itself, a world long vanished yet somehow echoing into ours. Picture a smooth stone washed up from a riverbank, worn by centuries of water. Nothing about it screams importance, but glance closer and subtle marks trace across its surface. Delicate lines too organized to be purely natural, patterns faint enough that they might easily be dismissed. Perhaps this is all that remains of a structure, a tool, or an object from a civilization that moved across the land before us. Perhaps it is nothing. And yet, for a brief, fleeting moment, your mind can see what time has almost erased, imagining an entire world from a single fragment. And in that imagining, the earth stretches backward. You can see rivers flowing through landscapes that today are deserts, oceans that now retreat into silence, and forests that vanish into stone. You can see creatures, strange and unfamiliar, moving through these lands, not entirely human, not alien, but living, breathing forms with intelligence tuned to a world unlike our own. Perhaps they moved in harmony with the tides of wind and water, with the cycles of fire and flood. Perhaps they built communities that were not easily visible to the casual eye, structures integrated into the landscape, homes that grew as organically as the trees and ferns that surrounded them. The faintest traces of these lives might exist in subtle contrasts between now and then. Consider a modern river, carefully channeled, flowing past cities and farmlands. Long ago, it may have been wider, wilder, carving its path through a valley where another kind of life thrived. Creatures walked its banks that no longer exist, and beings, not human, might have built along it in ways that left only whispers. Look at a mountain range today, jagged and imposing, and imagine it millions of years ago, softer from erosion, dotted with forests where another civilization watched the seasons shift, not counting years, but patterns, cycles, and the rhythms of the land itself. These are not fantastical notions, but grounded in the evidence of Earth's deep history: petrified forests, fossilized coral reefs atop deserts, whale bones high in mountain ranges. Each discovery reminds us that the planet we inhabit today is only one version of itself. It is both temporary and fragile, a brief chapter in a narrative that has unfolded for eons. And within that narrative, there is room for intelligence to have flourished, even if only faintly recorded. The duality is striking. On one hand, we feel gratitude for the world we inherit, its measured seasons, its predictable cycles, its steady resources. On the other hand, a subtle envy emerges for what once was, for the wild expanses of unbroken forest, for creatures and beings whose lives and designs we cannot fully know, for freedom that came without fences, without borders, without the constraints we have layered over the land. These feelings coexist, quietly, a yin and yang of perspective that deepens our sense of connection to the earth. Even the smallest fragment of a past civilization carries this tension. A shard of metal in a coal seam, a faint carving in stone, or a fossilized object that doesn't match known life, all suggest a presence once lived, now nearly erased. You can almost sense the hands that shaped it, the awareness that hovered over it, the purpose that once gave it meaning. And yet, the fragment is indistinct, subtle, leaving the mind to fill in the gaps. In that act of imagining, we are connected across millions of years, touching a consciousness that was not ours, yet undeniably part of the same world. The landscapes themselves tell a similar story. Picture a desert today, flat and dry, windswept and barren. Millions of years ago, the same ground may have been lush, fed by rivers that no longer run, watered by rainfall patterns that have vanished. Creatures that roamed the land, some small, some enormous, would have shaped it in ways we can barely perceive. Perhaps beings walked among them, observing, shaping, learning, creating patterns that the wind has long since erased. And yet, subtle hints remain: fossilized footprints, traces of sediment disturbed in unusual ways, alignments in the rocks that feel deliberate, though the centuries have softened them. Even as time erodes, some memories remain. A petrified forest in Arizona tells us that once, green giants shaded creatures now lost. A limestone cliff along a coast hints that it was once submerged, home to forms of life no longer here. And scattered among these layers, tiny fragments of unknown origin, sometimes brushed aside, sometimes preserved in archives, invite speculation. What stories could they tell if we had the eyes to see? What lives did they touch? What knowledge might they carry, silently waiting beneath the soil? The past is not always benevolent, however. Life and environment have long been in tension. In eras before us, survival demanded adaptation to extremes: searing heat, sudden floods, harsh winters. And yet, within these struggles, there was beauty. Rivers teeming with life, forests dense with unseen wonders, skies alive with birds and insects larger and stranger than any we know today. Life and intelligence alike found ways to exist, to thrive, to leave impressions on the world. And in that, there is an echo for us, a reminder that the world we inherit is not simply a stage for comfort, but a living, breathing entity that has tested all who came before us. In imagining these lives, we must resist the urge to anthropomorphize too much. They were not humans in our image. Their senses, their bodies, their cultures would have been alien to us, and yet utterly natural to them. They may have moved in patterns aligned with lunar cycles, or the migration of enormous creatures, or subtle shifts in wind and water. Their understanding of survival and community may have been intertwined with the environment in ways that today feel impossible, yet entirely logical in context. And perhaps the most fascinating aspect of all is how little it takes to hint at their existence. A small object, a fragment of a structure, a subtle pattern in fossilized soil. These tiny remnants can spark the imagination to reconstruct entire worlds. They invite us to consider that intelligence can leave traces that endure in unexpected ways, scattered through the planet like seeds in the wind. We begin to see a rhythm the Earth creates, preserves, erases, and conceals. Within that rhythm, life appears and disappears. And somewhere in the folds of that process, the possibility of civilizations other than our own emerges, not as fantasy, but as a quiet, plausible truth. It is in the interplay of time and memory, creation and erosion, that the story truly unfolds. The fragments whisper possibilities, the fossils hint at the impossible, and the landscapes themselves preserve echoes of lives that may have touched the world in ways now mostly invisible. And yet, for those who choose to imagine, the Earth becomes alive with stories just beyond our reach, narratives that stretch beyond human memory, and questions that refuse easy answers. In this way, the past speaks to us, even faintly. It asks us to consider the long view, to appreciate what survives, and to wonder what might have been lost. It reminds us that our own presence is fleeting, that the world is both generous and relentless, and that curiosity is perhaps the only way to touch what has otherwise vanished. And as we walk through these ideas, the subtle contrasts of today and then emerge. The rivers we know, the mountains we climb, the forests we wander, all are touched by millions of years of change, and all carry hints of what has passed. Even in the cities we inhabit, the streets and buildings lie atop layers of memory, layers that may include remnants of lives and intelligence that preceded our own. This juxtaposition of now and then creates a quiet tension, gratitude for what is, wonder for what was, and curiosity for what may yet be discovered. And so the journey continues, not as a question to be answered, but as a story to experience, a meditation on time, life, and the possibility that humanity, for all its achievements, is only a part of a vast ongoing narrative that stretches across eons. If stories are one way the past survives, then landscapes are another. The Earth, though slow and deliberate in its language, is always speaking. It remembers through shape, through strata, through the silent curves of mountains and the hidden scars beneath seas. To listen is to recognize that geography itself is a kind of memory, one that takes patience, humility, and an eye attuned to deep time. Take, for instance, the quiet cliffs that rise along a coastline. To the casual eye, they are merely stone, layered in bands of brown and red. But to those who study them, each line is a page of history. Compressed sediments tell of rivers that once coursed here, of seas that surged and retreated, of forests that grew and burned. Within those lines lie fossils, sometimes delicate as a leaf's vein, sometimes colossal as a giant's ribcage. They remind us that the land we know today has worn countless faces, that beneath the surface, another world waits, not gone, but hidden. There are deserts too, where the wind carves ancient seabeds into ridges and canyons. Once, these were thriving ecosystems, rich with water and life. Now they are silent expanses of sand, stretching into horizons that seem eternal. And yet, beneath their silence, the bones of fish, the prints of plants, still whisper of a time when waves washed where dunes now rise. The land remembers, though we must learn how to hear it. Rivers, too, are keepers of memory. They carve valleys that reveal the skeleton of the earth. They expose rocks older than life itself, bearing witness to transformations we cannot fathom. A river is never the same from moment to moment, yet its path carries echoes of its former selves. Ancient bends abandoned, fertile floodplains built upon by those who came before. Some rivers flow over the remnants of cities now erased. Some conceal entire landscapes drowned by shifting seas. In every drop, there is both renewal and remembrance. And then there are the glaciers, slow-moving giants that carve their stories into stone. As they retreat, they leave behind valleys, lakes, and plains, reshaping the land in ways both violent and graceful. They remind us that time does not erase without also creating. The same forces that can grind civilizations into dust can also lay the foundations for new life, new cultures, new beginnings. But perhaps the most haunting memories are those we cannot see: the buried cities, the submerged coastlines, the ruins hidden beneath soil and sea. We know of places like Pompeii, preserved in volcanic ash, a single moment of daily life captured in stone. But there are countless others, swallowed by erosion, by rising waters, by the slow crush of tectonics. Imagine what lies beneath the waves just off our shores. Remnants of human settlements drowned as glaciers melted at the end of the last ice age. Entire villages, entire ways of life, now resting quietly in darkness, visited only by fish and currents. And if this is true for us, for civilizations as recent as 10,000 years, what might be true for those that came long before? How many times has the earth erased, reshaped, rebuilt? If the land beneath our feet has held forests where deserts now stretch, oceans where mountains now rise, could it not also have held cultures, lives, beings unlike any we know? Their homes may now be cliffs, their monuments sediment, their stories buried beneath miles of rock. This is the duality the earth insists upon: memory and forgetting, creation and destruction. The land holds on, but never fully. It reshapes even as it preserves. It leaves us fragments, not wholes. A fossil here, a shard there, enough to hint, but never enough to tell the full tale. It is as though the earth offers us puzzles, daring us to imagine the pictures they once belonged to. And in this, there is something quietly humbling. For all our certainty, for all our maps and measurements, we walk daily on a stage whose earlier acts we barely comprehend. The hills we drive past may have once been shorelines. The forests we hike may stand upon layers of forgotten jungles, savannas, deserts. And beneath even those, deeper still, lie traces of times beyond measure. It is easy to feel small in the face of such time, but smallness can be a gift. To recognize our place in this endless unfolding is to find gratitude for the moment we are given, to see that we are not the beginning, nor the end, but a chapter among many. And if the earth has sheltered countless stories before us, it will shelter countless more after. That, too, is a kind of comfort. Now imagine, just for a moment, how those landscapes may have appeared to the others who lived before us. The beings whose existence we can only guess at. Perhaps they walked among forests taller than our tallest skyscrapers, their canopies alive with creatures no human eye has ever seen. Perhaps they drank from rivers flowing wider than any we know, rivers now reduced to narrow channels. Perhaps they looked upon mountains still sharp and new, unsoftened by erosion. Their struggles, too, would have been with their environment, but their relationship to it might have been wholly unlike ours, less about bending the land to their will, more about weaving themselves into its rhythm. It is strange, isn't it, to think of ourselves as inheritors of a stage once shared with lives so different from ours. Stranger still to realize how much of that stage has shifted since. What we call permanence is but a moment in the earth's slow breathing. And what feels to us like the final word may, in truth, only be a pause before the land reshapes once again. To listen to the landscape is to hear these echoes. To walk upon the earth is to step across stories too deep for memory, too vast for records, and yet they are here, in the quiet of valleys, in the rhythm of rivers, in the silence of deserts, waiting for us to pause, to listen, to imagine. Every so often, the earth surprises us. For all its power to erase, it occasionally offers fragments, glimpses that rise to the surface, like messages carried by the tide. These discoveries are rarely whole, never complete, but they carry with them enough mystery to leave us unsettled, enough to remind us that our understanding of human history, of civilization itself, may be narrower than the truth. Consider Göbekli Tepe, on a hilltop in southeastern Turkey. Buried for millennia, stood massive stone pillars arranged in circles. They are carved with animals, symbols, and abstract patterns. The site is at least 12,000 years old, far older than the pyramids, far older than Stonehenge. For centuries, we believed agriculture came first, and that cities and temples followed. Yet Göbekli Tepe suggests the opposite, that people gathered first in ritual, in shared purpose, and only then settled long enough to farm. It rewrites the story we thought we knew, and if one site, buried in plain sight, could so profoundly alter our view of history, what else might lie hidden still? Or take Doggerland, the lost world beneath the North Sea. Once, it was a vast plain of rivers, lakes, and forests, connecting Britain to mainland Europe. It was home to people, to animals, to entire ecosystems. But as the last ice age ended, rising seas slowly swallowed it. Today, fishermen dredge up bones, tools, and even worked flint from the seabed. Each artifact is a reminder of a land that no longer exists, a civilization erased not by myth, but by the simple rising of water. Imagine standing where the North Sea now churns, and realizing that beneath those waves, beneath that grey expanse, were once hearths, homes, laughter. There are other fragments too, scattered across the world. Submerged ruins off the coast of India, structures lying beneath the Gulf of Cambay, so ancient that even the questions of who built them or why remain unanswered. The Yonaguni Monument off Japanese shores, a series of vast stone terraces and steps that some say are natural, others claim are carved. Whether shaped by hands or by the sea itself, they spark a sense of strangeness, a whisper that not all is as we assume. And then there are the megaliths, scattered like puzzle pieces across continents. Stone spheres in Costa Rica, standing stones in Scotland, lines etched into the deserts of Peru. Many of these can be explained. Ritual, astronomy, art, but their sheer scale, their persistence across time and cultures suggests something deeper. That across civilizations, across landscapes, there's always been an urge to mark the earth, to inscribe meaning onto stone in ways that endure long after flesh and memory fade. What unites all these discoveries is not certainty, but mystery. They do not tell us complete stories. They do not fit neatly into timelines. Instead, they gesture. They point to possibilities larger than themselves. A carved pillar here, a submerged tool there, enough to ignite the imagination, to suggest entire worlds lost to time. And yet, even as they astonish, they are only the tiniest fraction of what has been. For every Göbekli Tepe unearthed, countless others remain buried. For every artifact dredged from the sea, countless more are lost to the depths. Archaeology is a discipline of patience, but it is also one of humility. We must admit that what we know is not the full story, but merely the slimmest of glimpses. It is tempting, sometimes, to wish for certainty, to hope for an intact city, a preserved library, a voice from the past speaking clearly across millennia. But perhaps there is beauty in the fragments, in the way they demand imagination, patience, wonder, in the way they remind us that history is not a fixed thing, but a shifting puzzle, one that can change shape with a single discovery. And here we return to the possibility, not as fantasy, but as an open question. If fragments of our own story, only a few thousand years old, can vanish so completely, what of lives older still? What of beings whose time came before ours, whose struggles were with climates, rivers, and landscapes we no longer recognize? If they left anything behind, would we even recognize it? Or would it, too, be taken by the sea, ground to dust by glaciers, buried beneath volcanic stone? The discoveries we do have remind us how fragile permanence is, how easily cities can sink, how quickly forests can vanish, how entire ways of life can be erased by the slow breathing of the earth. And yet, they also remind us that not everything is lost, that sometimes, against the odds, a piece remains, a shard, a carving, a memory set in stone. When we hold such a piece in our hands, we are not just holding an artifact, we are touching the edge of another world, a world that once was vibrant, filled with voices and dreams. A world that is gone, but not entirely forgotten. And in that touch, that fleeting connection across time, we glimpse the strange truth that we are not the first, that we walk on ground once walked by others, that our story is just one among many. And so as we look at Göbekli Tepe, or imagine the lost plains of Doggerland, or trace our fingers over carvings half eroded by the sea, we are invited to wonder, not just about what was, but about what else may still be waiting. Waiting beneath the soil, beneath the waves, beneath the slow drift of time. The earth has never been gentle. It has never promised safety. For those who walked here before us, survival was a conversation with the land itself. One season might bring an abundance of fruit, rivers running thick with fish, plains alive with the hooves of animals. The next might deliver silence, cracked earth, storms that erased what was built in a single night. To endure meant learning not just to adapt, but to belong. When we think of civilizations before our own, we often picture invention, architecture, or art. But beneath those achievements was something more raw, the constant negotiation with an unpredictable earth. Every dwelling raised against the wind, every path cut through a dense forest, every fire lit against the cold was a response to this truth. Nothing was guaranteed, and yet, perhaps that was their gift. Hardship, as much as it shapes scars, also shapes meaning. When food was gathered, it was celebrated. When winter was survived, it was honored. When rivers flooded and retreated, stories were told to explain their moods. For these lost civilizations, gratitude was not a concept to be practiced, but a condition of being alive at all. Compare that to our lives now. We move in a world softened by technology, where storms are tracked by satellites, and hunger, for many, is solved with a trip to the store. We live longer, we heal faster, we travel farther. And yet, the buffer we've built also insulates us from the rawness of existence. The dawn still comes, but how often do we feel it as a miracle? The rains still fall, but do we still pause to give thanks? There is a strange duality here. In the quiet, it is possible to sense it, a subtle jealousy of those who came before, not for their struggles, but for their intimacy with the earth, for the way their lives were interwoven with rivers and stones, with stars and seasons. Their world was harsher, but perhaps also deeper, carved with a kind of meaning that we now have to seek deliberately. Time erases, but not completely. It leaves us hints. A shard of pottery where a home once stood, a bone fragment that suggests a body long returned to soil, a mark carved into stone, faint, but stubbornly clinging to presence. These pieces are small, ordinary, even, yet they whisper of something larger, whole lives, whole cultures that once flourished where now we stand. To hold them is to imagine the world they belong to, a world both alien and familiar. We know this pattern because we see it even in our own history. Towns swallowed by sand, villages abandoned after rivers changed course, entire ways of life undone by a shifting climate. What feels eternal in our time may, in 1,000 years, leave only the faintest trace. A foundation beneath new soil, a tool corroded into anonymity, an echo barely louder than silence. And yet, in that echo lies a reminder. The fragility of life does not make it meaningless, it makes it luminous. To live now, to breathe in this moment, is to share the same fragile miracle as those before us. They endured their storms, and we endure ours. They built what they could, and so do we. And just as time folded over them, it will one day fold over us. It is humbling, but it is also grounding. To imagine those who came before is to see ourselves reflected, not as masters of earth, but as participants in its endless cycle. Their struggles are not so far from ours, their gratitude not so alien. The earth shaped them as it shapes us, harshly, beautifully, unrelentingly, and as we listen to the silence of what remains, perhaps we can feel what they felt, that every season, every harvest, every dawn was both a gift and a challenge. That life, in its brevity, was precious not in spite of hardship, but because of it. If you step back and listen closely, you might feel it, the weight of countless lives that have unfolded on this same planet, in this same air, beneath these same stars. Their stories, though faded, are not gone. They lie beneath our feet, pressed into stone, scattered as dust across the wind, carried in rivers that have flowed for longer than memory can hold. We often think of time as a straight line, the past receding, the future approaching. But the earth whispers something different. Time folds, it layers. It repeats in patterns too vast for any single life to see. Civilizations rise and fall, each leaving faint fingerprints for the next to stumble upon. The river erases, and yet it also preserves. Fire consumes, but its ash nourishes. What vanishes is never entirely gone. It becomes part of what follows. Perhaps that is the truest connection we share with those who may have come before us. Not their exact souls or their languages, or even their names. But their rhythm, their dance with survival and meaning, their ability to look at the same sky, feel the same sun on their faces, and know that life was fleeting, yet vast, that gratitude and struggle walked hand in hand, inseparable. Tonight, we have wandered across the idea of a world both known and unknown. We've imagined the great landmass of Pangaea, where life grew under harsher skies. We've brushed against the possibility of civilizations whose whispers remain only in fragments, in stories passed like embers from one generation to another. We've touched the contrast between their world and ours, not to separate us, but to remind us that we are not outside the flow of time, we are within it. And though time has taken much, it has also given the comfort of homes, the safety of medicine, the quiet miracle of lights that push back the night. Yet, beneath all this, the same truth lingers. We are temporary. We are guests here, unlike those before us. We too will one day become a layer in the story Earth tells. But let that not be frightening. Let it instead deepen the moment you are in now. The breath you take, the ground beneath you. The simple act of existing in this moment is extraordinary. To live is to carry forward not only your own story, but the weight of all stories that came before. And so, as we let this chapter draw to a close, remember, what you've heard tonight is not a conclusion. It is only a beginning. Each fragment of history, each unanswered question, each trace half buried in the soil is an invitation to wonder, to imagine, to feel part of something larger than yourself. This world is ancient, but it is also alive. Its mysteries are not behind us, they are all around us, waiting for the patient eye and the curious heart. As the night deepens and the quiet settles, carry that thought with you. You are not separate from the Earth's story. You are inside it, so rest, if you are ready. Let your thoughts drift like rivers, returning to the sea. And if you are still awake, let curiosity guide you forward, because there is always another chapter, another hidden corner, another question waiting to be asked. And when we return together, we will pick up the thread again. Another story, another possibility, another step deeper into the tapestry of Earth and time. For now, thank you. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. Thank you for listening with patience, with wonder, with heart. And as always, please leave a like to help other like-minded souls find their way here. Share where you are watching from and what time it is for you, and subscribe if you'd like to continue exploring these quiet paths with me. Until the next story unfolds, good night.